So as Stephanie mentioned, I'm Amy Goldstein. I'm the Prevention Research Branch Chief at NIDA. For those of you who are looking at the agenda and expecting to see Carlos Blanco, I am not, in fact, Carlos Blanco. He is sorry that he couldn't be here today, but I am sort of glad he couldn't be here today because I get to stand in his place. And I think these are really interesting presentations, and I'm happy to kind of offer up some comments. I don't have slides. I have this scratched piece of paper, which will hopefully turn into some comprehensive thoughts. But I think the presentations today kind of really highlighted the value of big data and looking at data both to determine effectiveness of intervention, and I think we saw that with the policy presentation, to identify opportunities for prevention interventions and directions for how we might modify the interventions that we have. I really kind of want to thank Stephanie and Ashley in particular for using the PATH data to sort of illustrate that you don't have to look at opioid databases to find information about opioids. I think there's a wealth of data that exists out in the universe of studies that could inform our thinking about opioids and other substances. PATH is one of them. Monitoring the Future was mentioned, and also kind of I'll put a plug in for the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, which is a large database normative sample oversampled for substance use, looking at brain development. So I think there's a lot of databases that exist where we can find data points to look at targets for preventive interventions that you might not think about. And I think kind of the big open question that I think about and that we think about at the branch, and I think that the field is struggling with, is how prevention of opioid misuse might be the same or different than prevention of misuse of other substances. And I think what these presentations highlighted for me is that there are some distinct differences that we need to pay attention to. And one of the most prevalent ones that came out, I think, in Stephanie's presentation and also in Ashley's, is that age really matters. That prevention can't end when childhood ends, and that there's this big gap in our understanding of prevention of substance misuse in adults. And at NIDA, we put out an RFA as part of the HEAL initiative focused on prevention in young adult and early adulthood, so focusing on that 16 to 30 age gap. But I think what Stephanie's presentation highlighted is that it not even ends there, right? That we have to look past age 30. And so how do our models of prevention change with increasing age? And so I'll kind of put a plug into those of you who are interested in adulthood to please put in grant applications to look at prevention of initiation of substance misuse in adulthood, because it's a clear gap area for us. The other thing that the presentations highlighted for me in thinking about the PDMPs is also kind of a gap in terms of understanding structural interventions. And I think this conference in general over the past 2 days, I think that's kind of a recurring theme, which is what is the role that policy needs to play in having a major impact on substance misuse and substance use initiation. And, we sometimes talk about this notion of tiered intervention, so thinking about, an overlay of universal with indicated and selected. And what Magda's presentation called for me was this notion of tiering, but in terms of structural and individual. So you could have a really good PDMP, but then are you also linking to care? You could have a really good PDMP, but are you providing alternate pain management strategies? So what else are you offering in addition to the structural intervention that could then impact initiation of substance misuse? And I kind of also sat there thinking about this notion of polysubstance use, which is something that we talk a lot about. I recently visited Penn State and their new consortium, and kind of a theme there, which I'll reiterate here, is that it can't just be about opioids, right? I mean, we have other substances that are kind of, you hit one problem, another one will crop up, so we can't just kind of focus on opioids and forget about the role of polysubstance use. And I'd love to kind of think this through a little bit more, but my mind was being a little bit blown thinking through Ashley's finding in relation to Stephanie's with kind of what the role of pain is or is not, at different age points, and when you have polysubstance users versus not, how you have to think about pain management and when it's an issue and when it's not an issue. So I'll kind of end a little bit there and put out one point for us to maybe think about or reflect on, which is something I've brought up in other contexts over the course of this meeting, which is I think these findings are fascinating, but what I would challenge everyone in this room to think about is how do they not end here, and how do they not end with just a publication and a presentation, and how do we kind of take these data points and how do we take these data findings and then leverage them into actionable interventions? And so what's the next step, and how do we move the field and move our epidemiologists and our methodologists to take what they're learning from these really amazing data analyses into new interventions or kind of new implementations of interventions, so that we're constantly pushing the field and also kind of making a difference on rates of substance misuse and subsequently overdose deaths. So I'll kind of stop my comments there and open it up to the floor for kind of further discussion, and I think we have about maybe 10 minutes left.